did I get the notes to everybody for today? Okay, all right. So I want to finish up with what we were looking at last time, but before we get into good old, wait a minute. Do I have the right thing here? No, I have two copies of one thing. All right, I may have to get up in a minute, but what I want to do first is we ended up talking last time about Roman civic religions as sort of setting the back. Yes, Anna.
Kendall, before we get started, can I just tell you that I heard from Bonnie?
Uh-huh.
Okay, everybody from class. And I sent her a card for Marty, and then she sent me a wonderful email back, a very descriptive email. And she just wanted everybody to know that she's missing class and she's missing all of us. And I told her we needed her expertise the other day. And that, you know, she was kind of giggling in her email about it. So I just wanted everybody to hear from her through me because she wanted that.
Great. Thank you for that update. That's great. We appreciate that. Yes, Jim.
And if I have to leave abruptly, it's not because I'm bored. It's because I've got guys working on my house. And
oh, okay.
I had a breaker go out 5 minutes ago, and who knows what's going to happen. So.
Okay. All right. If you disappear, we'll assume that you lost power again.
Yeah. It's not magic. It's just like I left.
Okay. All right.
Can I mention one more thing, Kendall?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When you send these notes to us, is it possible to make the font a little larger next time?
Yes, and that will mean it will take 2 pages to print out.
Oh, you were working on whatever you can do to get it to be 1 page.
1 page.
That's
right.
Understandable. Okay.
But I mean, that doesn't matter to me if it's easier for you if the font is bigger.
It's hard to see, and I would just print it on the back so I wouldn't actually use another paper.
Right.
So
see, I don't have both sides printing at home, so that's why I sort of.
Well, and I think that's a good exercise to try to do. I understand the effort there. It's just small for me, but once I have my glasses on, it's fine. So I just thought.
And the other thing is you can download the document and increase the font yourself if you wanted to.
Oh, that's true. That's easy. I should do that. Okay, thank you. That's true.
And then you can make the size you want it.
Okay.
Which is true for all of us too. Any other announcements or business details? Sorry, I don't want to cut anybody off. All right. So we had talked about the various options or the various characteristics of Roman civic religion as part of the environment that Christianity was arising in the midst of. And I wanted to also mention, because the civic religion and the parallel that always comes to mind for me is the Anglicanism of the 17th and 18th centuries when the English church was really the state church, and Parliament was passing laws about theological issues, and it really was this intertwined sense of religion as the anchor of social stability that made the state feel secure, right? And there really was little differentiation between being a good Englishman and being a good Anglican Christian, right? And those two things were sort of, and that was, Rome was like that, and for a lot of people, that did not include any kind of real spiritual anything. It was social, political, logistic, legal reality. It was part of the air, but there was nothing transcendent about it. And this is why you get the Puritans and you get the Methodists and you get all these people who don't find the British state church very satisfying in terms of their soul, right? That same thing was true in Rome, that there were a lot of people for whom you know, it's fine to worship the emperor, and we'll talk a little more about that in a minute. It's fine to do these rituals that help to stabilize the social order, but it doesn't do anything for me inside. It's not anything that's going to be satisfying or moving or you know, emotionally engaging for me. So that's why you have some of these other options. Oh, hi, kitty. And I wanted to I wanted to mention some of the other options that people had that were more or less in addition to the Roman state church. It wasn't like you had to make a choice. And that's one of the things that's going to be weird about Christianity. It's already weird about Judaism, but it's going to be weird about Christianity too, that there's some sort of expectation that these things are mutually exclusive. Because for most other religious alternatives, there was not the sense that it was mutually exclusive. It was more usually that, yeah, you're a Roman citizen and you do your Roman political thing, and you do this other religious option that you have. So it's sort of like, well, of course everybody votes, and some people root for the royals. You know, right? There's nothing mutually. You don't have to choose between the Royals and the city of Kansas City, right? They're different categories. So that was largely true with the Roman state church as well. So we talked a little bit about Platonism and Neo-Pythagoreanism, that these were philosophical options. They were for the intellectuals. They were for the people who didn't just want to, you know, pay their taxes and show up at the arena to watch some lions fight every once in a while and kind of go on with their nice Roman lives. They were for people who had the leisure to think about, you know, what is the universe made out of? You know, where did the first motion come from? Those kinds of existential or philosophical questions. And those people tended to have a very abstract idea about the divine. It wasn't personal, you know, it wasn't Zeus running after some maiden. It wasn't some goddess having a fight with another goddess and tricking some poor human female into something or other. You know, there was none of that personality narrative storytelling kind of essence to it. For the philosophers, for the Platonists and the Neo-Pythagoreans, they were trying to understand the abstract nature of the universe. And so that you might also think of them as scientists of their day. And we'll talk a little bit more about another form of science in a moment, but that sense of purely intellectual, rational speculation about the nature of things was another option that was compatible with Roman civic religion, right? Does that make sense? Everybody get what we're talking about? Okay. Or questions? Don't hesitate to jump in here. Okay. Now, there were other people for whom the state religion was not engaging or satisfying, but they were not intellectuals. And some of those people were involved in what we tend to call mystery cults. And the two that we actually know a little something about, because they were very popular, and so they show up in written historical references more maybe than some others, were the Eleusinian Mysteries and then Mithraism, which we've talked about a little bit before. We haven't really mentioned the Eleusinian Mysteries, and that was the cult, if you will, that was most accessible to women. The Roman state process, there were goddesses in the mix, but there really was little role for women in that whole institutional social process. And Mithraism very clearly has no role for women. There were no, as far as we've ever been able to tell, there were no women members, there were no women present in the rituals. You know, maybe they had a women's auxiliary that we haven't heard anything about, but as far as we know, there was no formal role for women. So if you were a woman who had the leisure and the inclination to pursue a spiritual life, one of your best options was probably being involved in the Eleusinian mysteries. And this was the cult of Demeter and Persephone. So I don't know how many of you remember the myth of Persephone, that she's, Persephone is the daughter of the goddess Demeter. Demeter is the goddess of grain. And a lot of cultures will have this from back when they moved from hunting and gathering to agriculture. It was with the permission of some divine power. And very often that divine power is female, who says it is okay to plant. It is okay to plow. It is okay to basically force the hand of nature in a settled agricultural way, rather than just gathering what's growing anyway, right? So Demeter is that goddess in Roman mythology. And she has a daughter, Persephone, and the myth origin story goes that Persephone, as a young girl, probably right on the edge of puberty, is playing with her friends in the meadows, and she spots this particularly beautiful flower. And so she goes to pick the flower, and lo and behold, it's a trick by the god Hades, who is the lord of the underworld. This is where all the souls go when they die, right? Not particularly an afterlife, not a fun place, but this realm of the shadows or the shades, where everybody goes after they die to just sort of sit around and be bored. Well, Hades is bored too, so he wants a wife. And so this is why he is seeking to attract Persephone, because she's pretty. And so she goes to pluck this flower, and the earth opens up and swallows her, which is something that happens in an area that is subject to earthquakes. So there may be some sort of cultural memory there. But anyway, she finds herself in the realm of Hades, and she's stuck there. She can't get away, even though she's not happy and she's upset, and so she refuses to eat. Meanwhile, Demeter can't find her daughter anywhere. She goes out looking, and she can't come up with her, and so she gets really pissed off and upset, and so she basically cancels the fertility of the earth. She goes into mourning, which means she's not causing the grain to grow at all. And so there's just like this this drought and this famine and this, you know, the earth is not cooperating with human endeavor anymore. And so finally, the other gods get wind of this, because nobody's sacrificing anymore, because there's no grain, so there's no cattle, so there's nothing to sacrifice. And they're like, okay, listen, Demeter, you got to get over this, because we're all suffering now. Nobody's getting any sacrifices. What do you need here? Well, what she needs is Persephone back. She's not going to settle for anything less. And so the gods get together and they have a council, and they decide, okay, sorry, Hades, we know that, you know, you were happy having Persephone with you, but this is not sustainable, and so you have to give her back. And Hades says, well, she finally ate one pomegranate seed, so now you can't have her back, because she ate something in the realm of the underworld. And Demeter's like, okay, you guys are toast, you know, no more summer, no more grain, no more anything. And so they basically come to a compromise, which is that Persephone will come back and be with her mother for 6 months of the year, or 9 months of the year, depending on which form of the myth you read. And then for the other portion of the year, she has to go back and be in the underworld with Hades and spend that time with him. And Demeter's like, well, that's fine, but nothing's growing while she's gone. So partly this is an origin myth for the change of seasons. Why do you have a season of growth and a season of no growth? But this myth also underlies the religious sense that seed grain is sacred. Seed grain must not be eaten. And this is something that any society that's going to be agricultural has to get this, has to get that you have to save a certain portion of the harvest, whatever it is that you grow. You have to save that as seed for next year. If you're agricultural, if you depend on what you raise from planting, then you have to think ahead enough to realize that you can't eat it all. You have to save some for the coming year. And so the whole mystery, as we've been able to piece it together, because the idea was you weren't supposed to tell anybody unless they were another member of the cult. What happened was that at the end of the ritual, which is all about Persephone, and Persephone comes to represent the grain, Persephone being taken underground until she is resurrected or given back in spring. So part of the ritual is that the seed is taken underground, which is to say it's stored, and then it's brought back out in the spring when you can plant it and it can flourish. So you can see how that's kind of a very female story and female way of looking at the world. But the center of the cult is a sheaf of barley. Basically, that's the secret, is that the sheaf of barley is sacred and must be protected and must be saved until the coming spring. And there was a lot of dancing, there was a lot of feasting, there was a lot of singing and ritual and prayers and all kinds of stuff. And there was a lot of initiation levels that you went through before you got to kind of the most sacred center of the thing. And people were not supposed to talk about it. They were not supposed to write about it. So this is what we have sort of projected based on what people did say and what we found archaeologically and so on, was the sense of the sacredness of grain. So there is this model of moving through a hierarchy of initiations. And we'll see that also in Mithraism and also in the Persian options, that that you don't just enter into full membership in the cult right away. You have to go through a process. And that's Christianity is going to be shaped by that process. Okay, everybody kind of got that one. And then you'll recall we've talked about Mithraism, where the center of the mystery is the precession of the equinoxes, that Taurus is changing, Aries is changing to Taurus, or however it is that works, and that so there's a piece of astronomy and astrology in it, but the idea that the bull Taurus is being overcome by the divine power, and so we want to participate in the new age, the new era that is coming into being as the bull dies. So we're thinking now that they weren't actually killing bulls; they were actually watching the stars, is what was going on with that. But it's there is also this sense of a mystery. They didn't tell you this up front. This is what you found out after you went through all of the initiation processes. And this was an exclusively male cult, and it was very popular with the military, and that's going to be important. And it's partly because it is based around a heavenly mystery, something that's happening in the skies, and it is not tied to any local divinity. It's not tied to the river, it's not tied to the mountain, it's not tied to the god of your cities. So if you're a soldier, you know, wherever you get sent, you can still fully participate in this religious tradition, in this community, because it's not about any physical location, right? Makes sense? And this is a question that, of course, Judaism is going to be wrestling with very strongly come the destruction of the temple, right?
Kendall,
Yeah.
didn't the Mithras cult come out of Persia?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I thought I had read.
Right. Originally, yes, but the Romans kind of made it their own.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they adopted it, and it became a fairly Roman thing, as opposed to Zoroastrianism and Manichaeism that remained sort of oriented toward the East, if that makes sense. But Mithraism was a perfectly legitimate, culturally acceptable option for a Roman citizen. Right? But yes, it did originate in Persia. And we'll talk a little bit about how that happens. So the other, it's not exactly a mystery cult, but it has some of those features, it comes out of Egypt and is sometimes called Hermetic, because it's named for the god Hermes, who is a messenger and a symbol of wisdom. And this is the cult of Egyptian astronomy and alchemy, particularly, and philosophy. So it has some qualities of what the transcendentalists will be thinking. This idea that all religious ideas, all religious myths, all religious practices arise from a perception of the same reality, the same divine reality in the universe. And that can be seen in the astrological, astronomical realities, the watching the heavens that all cultures do in one way or another. And it also finds expression in the ways in which matter reacts with matter and energy. So there was a lot of focus on what today we would call chemistry, what they called alchemy. And their concepts that there must be ways to take one form of matter and transform it into another form of matter. That was always somehow a divine activity or depended on divine energy, and therefore there was a lot of superstition around it, as well as some sort of primitive awareness about the actual chemistry of the physical world. It, to some extent, as it spread internationally, it became associated with the Isis cult, because the Isis story is one about the goddess whose brother / husband gets cut up into pieces and sent all over the world. And so there was this sense of everywhere all over the world has a stake in this, that we were part of the adventures of Osiris. And so that's how we connect to this esoteric wisdom from Egypt, right? And so this again is somewhat more intellectual. It's for people who want to say, oh, you know, we're smarter than those Demeter Persephone people. We're smarter than those Mithras people. We're the ones who have this deep theological understanding of how all that rises must converge. And we're all really talking about this one divine reality in all of our many ways. Does that make sense? Yeah, Anna.
It's so interesting how close science, what we consider science, and what we consider religion or spirituality is, especially during this time, that religion or spirituality, I don't know which word to use,
Yeah.
is kind of like how you explain what you can't explain with science. It's
Right.
it's science times one. It's like
Right.
over here. It's so interesting how science and religion now in our own vernacular are so enemy. I mean, they're
Right.
you can't have both. You can't.
Right.
It's just
Yeah.
how did we get so lost with that?
Well, keep in mind that in this view, in the Hermetic view, science is a subset of religion. So science is like the religious laws where we get it, where we understand it, where we know how it works. And then all the other divine laws are also operating the same way in the universe. We just haven't identified them yet.
Okay.
And so the whole point of becoming more wise, becoming more spiritual, is to have a better understanding of the divine law that is ruling over the whole universe. So, you start with the simple things, like don't mix Clorox and ammonia, right? Because that's bad. You start at that basic level, and then as you build up your understanding, you become more and more aware of the mind of God, kind of. And that's not the mind of God like the mind of Zeus.
Right.
It's the mind of God like this overarching intelligence that is the foundation of all reality, kind of thing. It's not the comic book characters.
Yeah, whatever that plan was.
Right.
How it all works. Yeah.
Right. The law of the universe. Right.
So interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So those were some of your options if you didn't quite get your needs met, right, from the Roman state religion. You could do some of those things. There's also, of course, Judaism, although it's very hard to become Jewish. You're either born there or you're not, right? And this is why Christianity is going to have this huge fight over whether you need to be Jewish in order to be Christian, and can you become that? And some of you may remember we talked a little bit about the communities of what were called the God-fearers. And those were people who were not born into the Jewish community, had no Jewish ancestry, but they thought Yahweh was the real guy. They thought the Jews were right, that in fact, these were the chosen people. This was who was in charge. They just didn't happen to have the right pedigree, right? But they would still attend the synagogue. They would still come to the temple while there was a temple. They would engage with the Jewish scriptures. They would keep the Jewish laws, even though they didn't quite qualify as Jews. So you could do that. But, unlike the mystery cults where you could advance based on, your study and your participation, a God-fearer was never going to become a Jew. That wasn't a possibility. You can never get over that threshold to be a real Jew. And eventually, as we'll see, Christianity becomes another one of these alternatives. So I'm trying to sort of set up some of the things that might have made Christianity attractive as an option among these sects. So finally, we also have the sort of exotic, or if you will, Eastern Persian options, one of which is Zoroastrianism. And there's an awful lot in Pauline Christianity as it evolves that it has parallels in Zoroastrianism. So Zoroastrianism posits that there is essentially a moral conflict, a battle for the soul of the universe, the outcome of which is not determined. This is an active struggle going on right now between the powers of good and the powers of evil, and it is not for sure which one of those is going to triumph. All right, so therefore, each of us as a spiritual force is required to choose up sides. You know, we might be the one who will tip the balance between the forces of light and the forces of darkness. It's Star Wars is a sort of Zoroastrian worldview, if you will, right? Who's going to triumph, the Force or the Empire? You know, and if you're Luke Skywalker, you have to make a decision. You know, are you going to be lured over to the dark side, or are you going to use your power for good, right? So whereas Christianity will say this struggle has already been won. You know, we are living after the end of that war. But for the Zoroastrians, it's still going on. We're not sure yet, you know, whether it's going to be God or the devil. So for the Zoroastrians, free will is a very important concept, right? Because if you are fated, as a lot of these other traditions are going to tell you one way or the other, there's nothing you can do about this struggle. But for them, the struggle is the central thing. And so therefore, they're going to say, every human being has a choice. You do have a choice. You can pick which side you're going to be on, and that is a real thing, and it will make a real difference. They also emphasize that once the battle comes to an end, if good triumphs, which of course is what we're all trying to bring about, right? Then everybody's going to be judged about how much they contributed to that, right? The people who are on the side of the angels, literally, are going to get rewarded, and the people who made it more difficult for the good to triumph are going to get punished, because that, again, that's the sort of dualistic nature of the universe, and these choices have real consequences. So your choice has a consequence now in determining the outcome. And even after the outcome is determined, your choice has a consequence in terms of how you will fare in that post-decision world, right? So there, not only is there the main power of good and the main power of evil who are struggling against each other, and then there are human beings who have to make a choice between good and evil, and do that struggle within themselves as well as among each other. There are also cosmic forces, which they tend to identify as angels and demons. There are lesser powers that are also in this battle. And where you're going to see this again is when we come to Islam, because Islam is really going to lift up that particular aspect from Zoroastrianism, that demons are a real thing and angels are a real thing, and those powers have impact on the world and can affect human beings. So that, and the other thing to say is Judaism had no concept of this. As far as they were concerned, Yahweh was in charge and had always been in charge, but until they got to the Babylonian captivity. And there you get the beginnings of a kind of Jewish mysticism that will see a struggle between the forces of light and the forces of darkness within each human being, within each human era, within each era of history. As a way of explaining how it can be. That's one potential explanation for how did all of us good Jews wind up in exile in Babylonia, right? Well, the forces of darkness are momentarily triumphant, right? And what is our responsibility as we live through that moment? That's a very Persian or Zoroastrian interpretation of how that came about. But they picked it up from the from the indigenous culture in Babylonia. Does that make sense?
Did anybody following the Zoroastrianism choose the evil side? I mean, wouldn't this only be for someone who wanted the good side anyway, or?
Well, presumably, that makes me think of a friend of mine who is interested in neo-paganism, and what she always said about the allegations of what a black mass is. She said, if you're not a practicing Christian, then a black mass is really going to a whole lot of trouble to insult a piece of bread. So you have to be a believer in order for it to make any sense to try to desecrate something, right? If you don't believe it in the first place, who cares, right? So I think you would say today, if we were Zoroastrians, we would say, okay, Trump and his minions are on the side of darkness, right? They are aiding the triumph of evil. All they're going to say is, this is a bunch of hooey. We don't believe any of it.
I see. So that whole side was for the good ones to have something to be against.
Right. That's right. To explain.
I figured. I just wondered if there were actually the evil studiers.
I am just as we have, mental health issues with people who think they're Jesus. I'm sure there were crazy people in these times who said, oh yeah, Angra Mainyu, who was the evil god, I'm on his side, he's my guy, kind of like maybe heavy metal people or so, it's a way of being transgressive and sort of flipping everybody else off. Yeah, Mike.
Darth Vader in Star Wars, Darth Vader thought he was really on the right side of history, or what? Is that what we're saying?
He thought he was on the side that could give him power. So that's always the explanation. Why would anybody choose the side of darkness? Well, because they want the power, right? That the god of darkness, if you side with him, he's going to give you power.
Like voting.
Yeah, kind of. Right. Exactly. Like why would the members of the Senate, support Trump? Well, because theoretically he's going to have their back. Although what you have to keep an eye out for in this kind of a system is the trick. It's like the devil, makes an agreement with you. The devil's always going to have his out. He's going to have his, I don't have to live up to my side of the bargain, right, kind of thing. So that's part of how who's on the bad side and who's on the good side. But it's a lot like living in this pre-election moment. We really don't know at this moment who's going to win the election, right? It could be Trump, it could be Biden. That's what life was for the Zoroastrians. You don't know who's going to win the election. So you better get out and make your phone calls and put a sign in your yard and give money, anything you can do to help your side. That's sort of your religious obligation and your religious practice. Make sense? All right. Finally, I want to just talk a little bit about Manichaeism, which was attempted to be kind of a synthetic faith. The originator, the prophet Mani, actually lived in the 3rd century. So he's trying to synthesize Jewish apocalypticism, sort of this, the end times are coming, right, that Jesus was preaching. And the ideas of Zoroaster about needing to side with the good, and the ideas of Jesus and Buddha. He was sort of taking a leaf from all of those pages. And his idea was, rather than there being an outcome that's actually in doubt, like the Zoroastrians, he went back to an origin story, and he said the world is composed of, there's a world of matter and there's a world of light. And what happened was that sometime around the time of creation, the light got spilled and the light got broken. And you can see this very strongly in Jewish mysticism still, these ideas that that these shards of broken light, the broken up goodness of the world, got scattered into the world of matter. And so now we have this world, this universe, where there are little bits of good scattered everywhere. There's little bits of good scattered in people. There's little bits of good in nature. There's little bits of good in beautiful objects. There's little bits of good just lying all over the place. And what our goal is to pick up all those little fragments out of ourselves and out of other people and out of the world, and somehow put them back together so that the world of light can be reassembled. Because that is what we belong to. You know, we think that we are matter, but actually we are fragments of the light trapped in matter. That's what a human being is. And so if we could put the world of light all back together, we'd realize that that's what we are and where we belong. And the world of matter would just fall away. We wouldn't have to be bothered with it anymore. Sometimes you'll hear the Jewish phrase tikkun olam, the repair of the world, and that originates in this mythology, in this worldview, that our job is to find those trapped fragments of light and repair them, put them back together, so that the true nature of goodness can be reconnected and reestablished. And that's what we're about. Yes.
Is that where the he is the light relates to? Did that Christian thing come from this, or was it all at the same time? Or
well, if you think about it, he's in the 3rd century, so Christianity's underway by this point.
Gotcha.
But the source of that sense that there's a world of light and a world of darkness, there's a world of goodness and a world of matter. You know, that duality, we call that dualism. There's two realities.
Mm-hmm.
That Christianity arises in that matrix, right? So even though Jesus never said that,
Right.
you know, he talked about the children of light and the children of darkness, but he was talking about strictly about humanity. He wasn't saying something about the universe, because Judaism in its origin says there's one universe, right? And Yahweh's in charge of it. That's the kind of the bottom line. But that when you try to do that monism, that oneness of everything, that always leaves you puzzled as to how to explain evil or hardship or suffering. So Judaism did develop a strand that sought to explain suffering by the sense that something got broken. You know, the world was good and whole, and somehow it got messed up. You know, and Christianity's going to adopt that whole Garden of Eden, you know, fall into sin. That's going to be their explanation. But they didn't make that up. It grows up in this whole culture where everybody's offering some sort of version of how did things get messed up the way they are, right? Okay, so any other questions about the environment in which Christianity is going to come to the Roman Empire and take root and begin to grow? Okay. So what I've done is left my notes on Elagabalus across the room. So I'm going to get up for a second. Do we want to take a break for a minute? Yes. All right, let's do that. Take 5 minutes and we'll be back. That's okay. I'm seeing everybody but Bob. In a minute.
He's there.
Oh, there he is. Okay, great. Okay. So I thought all of this is rather abstract that I've been talking about the Roman state religion and the environment in which Christianity takes hold. So I thought I would tell you the story about this guy, Elagabalus, and he is just a character. But I think his story serves to illustrate some of the realities about Roman culture and Roman religion that are going to help us see how Christianity had an appeal and how it answered some of the dilemmas that Roman religion was in after the turn of the millennium. So I couldn't help myself. This is the heliocentric heresies of eccentric Emperor Elagabalus. And Elagabalus lived from 204 to 222 of the current era. So just as the canon was closing, just as Christianity was becoming a force to be reckoned with, shall we say. So he came to the imperial throne in Rome because he was a cousin of the Emperor Caracalla, who ruled from 198 to 217. So Caracalla had actually a fairly almost 20-year reign, which at that time in Rome was quite a long time. And Elagabalus actually was born in Syria. He was born in a place called Emesa. And his mother was herself kind of a historic figure. She was a daughter of an important Roman family. And there was a rumor, which seems to have perhaps been originated, but at least was industriously spread by her mother, which is to say Elagabalus's grandmother. that actually Elagabalus was the son of the former emperor by Julius Somaeus, who had been having obviously an illicit affair with Caracalla. So, so he had, in some ways, a better claim to the throne because of his descent. Being, he was more than a cousin of Caracalla. He was actually Caracalla's son, if it were true that he had been conceived illegitimately by the emperor and his mother. However, his mother had gone off to be married in Syria, and there her son, and I don't even know what his birth name was, because we'll get to his name in a minute, was the royal family was also the priestly family, which is not unusual in a lot of cultures. So he was raised as the son of the royal family to be the high priest of the god of this town, this area. And the god was known as El-Gabal. Now, if you remember from our Jewish portion, Baal is god of whatever, right? So El-Gabal was the god of the mountains. And this was a mountain area of Syria where he was born. So he was known in Latin as Elagabalus, which just means the guy who belongs to the god of the mountains. He was named for the god whose high priest he was designated to be. So I don't know what they called him when he was a kid, but this is how history refers to him, although sometimes you'll see him in Roman histories or Greek histories called Heliogabalus, because Elagabalus, although being the god of the mountains, was also thought of as a sun god. So one of the ways I think about him is he was kind of like Akhenaten. If any of you remember Akhenaten in Egypt, who tried to overturn the whole Egyptian pantheon and only worship the Aten, the sun god, as basically a political maneuver, but also I think he probably was sincere about it in a certain way, that was the only god as far as he was concerned. Well, Elagabalus is going to do the same thing in Rome. He's going to try to overturn the whole existing pantheon and the whole existing theological and liturgical structure of Rome to this one particular god, understandably, because he's been raised that this is his god to take care of. This is his god to lead the worship of. So at the age of 14, when Elagabalus is 14, Caracalla dies, and he is succeeded by this guy Macrinus, but his grandmother and his mother are basically plotting to bring Elagabalus to the throne. And so they bribe members of the Praetorian Guard, and the Praetorian Guard is sort of like the Secret Service. They're the guard of the emperor. They belong to the emperor. They do what the emperor says, unless, of course, they get subverted by somebody else, in which case the emperor's kind of at their mercy. So these two women bribe the Praetorian Guard to assassinate Macrinus, and then they bring Elagabalus from Syria to Rome to assume the office of emperor. And so Elagabalus at 14 comes to Rome from Syria, and he brings with him the sign or the holy symbol of Elgabal, which is this meteorite rock, and it's this sort of black conical stone. So he takes it out of Emesa, where it had a shrine and was worshipped and where he grew up, brings it with him to Rome, And the first thing he does is to build a temple to Elgabaal called the Elagabalium. We're going to hear this sound a lot. But not only does he put the meteorite, the Elgabaal rock, in it, he also goes and gets the Vestal fire from the Temple of the Vestal Virgins and the shields of the Sali, which was another, these were sort of mythical founders of Rome and their shields. And the Palladium, the symbol of another goddess and the emblem of the Great Mother, Hera. He takes all of these sacred items out of the temples they were in, where they were worshipped. And this was 4 or 5 different major temples. He brings those objects and puts them all in the Elagabalium, so that all of Rome has to come and worship at the shrine that he has just built. And basically, of course, Elgabaal is the chief god of this whole thing. So anybody who wants to come and worship Hera or worship any of the other traditional gods of Rome has to come to his shrine that he's just built. He also throws a huge summer solstice festival, because when do you worship the god of the sun? Well, you worship the god of the sun at the summer solstice, right? That's the holy time. But he gives away a huge amount of free food to the population of Rome, which of course makes him very well thought of. People like it when your idea of worshiping your god is giving away free food. Like that will tend to make you popular. He also does what other cults had done with their sacred symbols or their statues of their gods, which is he takes this meteorite and puts it in a gold chariot with a bunch of pure white horses and fancy jewels and all that stuff, and has processions around the city of Rome so that everybody can turn out and see this rock and worship it and be a devotee of Elgabaal. And he also requires members of the Roman Senate to come to the Elgabalium and watch him as he does the rituals for his god. Because, I mean, this kid is 14. This is what he knows how to do. This is what he's been trained all his life to do. So his idea is, okay, let's get the Senate over here and get them participating in this. So we bring all of the power and all of the prestige of Rome to this particular cult that is my cult. Another thing that happened, which was very unusual, had not happened before or since, as far as I know, is that his mother and grandmother were given official designations as members of the Roman Senate. They were really, I think, the power behind the throne. It wasn't really him making a lot of these decisions, but they became not just guests, but actual members of the Senate, and they had official standing, and they were allowed to be part of the Senate process. Apparently, Elgabalus was married when he got to Rome. He divorces that wife, and he takes a wife from among the Vestal Virgins, which was an outrage. Was not done. These women were supposed to remain virgins for as long as they were attending the Vestal fires, and if it was discovered that one of them wasn't anymore, they walled her up alive. I mean, they took this seriously. But Elagabalus thinks, well, I'm a god and she's kind of a god, and so, we would have fantastically divine children, right? So he marries this one woman who's a Vestal virgin, although they never do, in fact, have any children. And it's not clear. I really looked. I tried to find out what became of her after his death, and I couldn't find out anything. So I don't know if she got walled up, or if she went back being a Vestal virgin, or if she just went off and married somebody else, or what happened to her. But anyway, the Senate was so unhappy about that pretty soon he divorced her, and married some other woman that everybody approved of his marrying in order to reduce the controversy. And I suspect that his mother and grandmother had a lot to do with deciding that this wasn't going to work out in terms of popular opinion, so he better do something else. Although there's some evidence that later, I mean, not a lot later, but somewhat later, he was actually living again with the Vestal Virgin lady. However, he also, in terms of his personal life, his most significant relationship seems to have been with his chariot driver, who was a former slave and a male person. And he also had an athlete from Smyrna, a guy named Zodicus, that he at some point appears to have married. And so he was, it looks like, one of the first historically recorded transsexuals and cross-dressers. He liked to wear female clothing and makeup. He preferred feminine pronouns when people talked to him. He liked to be referred to as his chariot driver's wife, mistress, and queen, as opposed to emperor. He is said to have, and you know, all of this, of course, is written by historians later, so you never know how much is an exaggeration. But he's said to have removed all the hair from his body everywhere, and offered fabulous rewards if a surgeon would come in and create a vagina for him. That was how seriously, yeah, exactly, he does. He wanted sex reassignment surgery. You know, that was what he was really looking for. So all of this within about 4 years, and eventually the Roman troops began to get a little bit where they didn't really take him seriously. They felt like he wasn't a particularly effective emperor, and he certainly wasn't a military strategist or leader or force to be reckoned with. And so Elagabalus had a cousin who was about his same age, who presumably did not have some of these personality quirks. And so the army and the Praetorian Guard decided that they liked him better. And eventually it looks like his grandmother kind of withdrew her sponsorship from him, transferred it over to his cousin. And at that point, there was a day when Elagabalus and his mother were reviewing the troops, and the troops turned on them and assassinated both of them and kind of got them out of the way. He was 18 at the time that happened. So he actually had a 4-year reign in there. Upon his death, all of the different sacred items were returned to the shrines where they had originally been. And the Elagabalus rock was returned to Syria, to Emesa, where it started out. And he was one of those people that was officially obliterated from history by the Roman Senate. All the statues that had been carved of him were either destroyed or they were recarved to put somebody else's face on them. All mentions of him are crossed out from the official records of anything. And basically the idea is that the reign passed from Caracalla to Macrinus and then to the cousin, Severus Alexander. So just Elagabalus never happened as far as all those people were concerned. So it's just kind of a weird, quirky story, except for a couple of things. One of which is that about 50 years after this whole thing, the Emperor Aurelian dedicated a new temple to Sol Invictus. And what Sol Invictus means is the unconquered sun. And so there was some lingering sense of the sun god being somehow the chief god or the the major deity, the chief deity. And it's interesting to note the date on which Aurelian did that dedication was December 25th. So there was a sense that that date was sacred to the god of the sun because it's close to the winter equinox, and it may have been even closer to the winter equinox given the shift in the calendars that we've had. And then if you go to the reign of Constantine, the god that Constantine served and observed more than any other before he became a Christian was Sol Invictus. So that sun god remained a god of the emperors. And the transition from paganism to Christianity was also the transition between Sol Invictus and Jesus Christ. That identity or parallel was part of how Constantine brought Roman culture with him into Christianity by sort of saying, okay, you all know Sol Invictus, well, he's really Jesus, kind of, that those two things are really the same. And that's why it makes sense that we're now going to worship this God instead of the other God. Mm-hmm. And there was some mythology around that. You probably all know that Constantine supposedly saw a vision of the sun, which told him to use the sign of Jesus, the Chi Rho, and paint that on everybody's shields, and that they would conquer. So there's this sense of the unconquered sun told Constantine to put the sign of Jesus on his soldier shields. And he, in fact, did win that battle. So obviously that must have been the right thing to do, right? So Elgabalus didn't know it, but he was part of a chain of theological evolution, if you will, that moved Roman culture and Roman theology in a direction that was going to make it accessible for Christianity. That makes sense. I think that story helps make a little more concrete some of all of that stuff that we've been talking about floating around in the environment, that made it possible for Christianity to take root and eventually to flourish. That, I mean, it's kind of a weird story, but I think it's funny.
Yeah. I'm surprised it hasn't been made into a movie.
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. Well, and you know, for much of Western history, it would have been seen as so weird that, you know, no one would believe it, kind of, and it would have been so considered so culturally icky. I think now might be a right time, you know, to say, here's this guy who wanted sex reassignment surgery all the way back in the 2nd or 3rd century in Rome. It's not as new as you might think. And there's the conniving grandmother and mother, and it's just a whole, it would make a great miniseries. You know?
But who are the good guys and who are?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that there are any. I mean,
you need those.
I can just imagine some sort of exasperated 50-year-old general, who's trying to hold down the Western Front, you know, and keep the barbarians from invading, and this is what he's got for an emperor, you know. I mean, this is what he's got to lead the troops, and how is he supposed to make this work? I mean, that would be my vision of who the good guy is.
I like it.
But the Romans had lived through Caligula, and
right,
he was out there with his senator horse and marrying his sister and all that. But
right. So I mean, yes, and this is an example of the the degree of craziness and corruption that can happen when you have this kind of concentrated power and no checks and balances, and everything is either about personal profit and corruption, or it's about the army and trying to hold down this essentially untenable empire. And part of what is going to, once Christianity becomes the religion of the empire, almost immediately it starts to fracture because the Roman Empire is so large. You know, it's going all the way from Ireland over to Persia, basically, and North Africa as well. And it simply cannot be held together by one administrative structure. And so when that administrative structure starts to fragment, the church is going to start to fragment along with it. And that, in some ways, that's going to be the cost of Christianity becoming the Roman state church. You know, is then it becomes a function of Roman politics. And so when something falls apart politically for the Romans, it's going to fall apart for the church as well.
When you said that Elagabalus made Christianity possible, is it mostly to the reference that he brought it, he zeroed it in on one God? I mean, is that the...
Well, it's his proposition that yes, rather than what we might today call the diversity of worship and theology that had characterized Rome, he tried to concentrate it just as much as political power was concentrated in the emperor. He wanted religious power to be concentrated in his one God. And his idea that was going to be the sun god, you know, kind of lays a trail of breadcrumbs.
Okay.
You know, that
one God and the sun god is what leads to the Jesus connection.
It's what makes Jesus possible.
Okay.
Right? You couldn't have just brought Jesus to Rome in 30 of the Common Era and said, here's the guy, and everybody would have said, what are you talking about? You know, I mean, that doesn't make any sense. In order for that to make any sense, you have to have that 300 years of movement of both chaos that then people are reacting to by wanting some kind of order, and then the attempts, the beginnings of ideas of, okay, maybe you could put all those holy things in one place and have one form of worship. Maybe you could just have one God, and who would that be? Well, the sun god, that would make sense. Maybe it's not all these cartoon comic book characters running around having affairs and you know, battles with each other. Maybe it is this more philosophical, you know, monistic one divine force kind of thing that the philosophers have been talking about. All of those tendencies are going to move more and more and more to crystallize in making Christianity make sense in a way that it would not have done at any previous moment in Roman history, and that that Jerusalem Christianity or Galilean Christianity wouldn't have worked. It had to be Pauline Christianity to fit into the niche that was available in Roman society for that kind of religious unity. That's what I'm sort of hoping that you'll see out of this. Other questions or thoughts about this? I know I'm spending a lot of time talking, and we have a few minutes. So if there's anything out of the last two sessions that's sort of you're still wondering about, this would be a good time. Next week, what I want to do is a little timeline kind of thing to sort of start trying to put events in an order so that they begin to make sense from a date standpoint about what happened when and how you make this move from paganism to Christianity as sort of central.
Kendall?
Yeah.
I've been reading some things that I've gotten online.
Great.
One of them was one that I had never heard, a theory I'd never heard, or this person saying it says it's true, is that the letters of Paul were in circulation before any of the Gospels.
Yeah. Oops. Hang on.
Really? That is correct. That's a correct interpretation.
Yes, because the letters of Paul are all written before any of the Gospels are written.
Huh.
And they were in circulation. In other words, Paul would send a letter to one church, and if that church thought it was useful and valuable, they would send copies of it to the other churches. Or possibly someone from another church would be there when it was read to the congregation, and they would say, "Ooh, can we get a copy of that for our church? You know, we have some of the same questions, or we have some of the same issues." So yes, and it's also possible, and we didn't really explore this when we were talking about the New Testament, but we believe there are references to other letters of Paul that are lost, that we no longer have. So there may have been a larger corpus even than we have today in circulation. And then you have people who are writing letters in the name of Paul that we're pretty sure that Paul never actually wrote. But again, all of those are composed before 70 AD, before the fall of the temple. And now they continue to circulate after the fall of the temple, but they're composed because one of the big tensions is between Paul and the Jerusalem church, right? Yeah. So once the Jerusalem church is no more, if Paul was still active, which would have made him quite old at that point, you would have expected to hear something about that from him, and we don't. So the tradition is that he was martyred sometime in the 60s.
Well, I'd heard that, but I had never, many things I've read and been to, I had never heard that.
Yeah.
But the letters actually were written before any of the Gospels.
Right, that's correct. Which is interesting to me in that questions of church discipline and church organization actually precede questions about the biography of Jesus. Right?
Yeah, that's what got to me was they had all these questions about how you should worship, how you should arrange things, were all being debated before there was any discussion of who Jesus was.
Well, but remember, there's two ways of thinking about who Jesus was.
Yeah.
Right? There's Paul's way of thinking about who Jesus was, which is the author of salvation and the bringer of new life, right? And then there's the who Jesus was in terms of his biography. What did he teach and what did he do? Paul doesn't care. Between the moment Jesus was born and the moment he went to the cross, doesn't matter to Paul. All he is interested in is the fact that Jesus was born and did go to the cross, and that is what enables God to bring about a new spiritual birth for human beings.
Well, and I would assume some of the gospel stories were in circulation, at least verbally.
Oh, right. Absolutely they were, but they don't matter to Paul.
Oh.
Paul never met Jesus in the flesh, you know. He never met Jesus outside of his own claims of having a vision of him, right? And Paul did not operate in a community that was concerned with stories about the life of Jesus. The church that was concerned about the life and the teachings of Jesus were the Galilean Christians, the people who went back to his hometown after his death and wanted to keep his community alive. They weren't worried about whether he was the Jewish Messiah, and they weren't worried about whether he was some sort of dying and rising God who could get you immortality. They were worried about how did he teach us to live? But they died out. And so, you know, we don't really have much other than the Gospels themselves that is related to those kinds of questions.
Huh.
Yes, Anna.
When you said it was really just the Pauline Christianity that would have helped this last thing we were talking about, because the Pauline did such a good job when it traveled, combining other cultures' explanations with this new story.
Right, right,
And also because you didn't have to be born a certain way. Okay.
right,
All right.
right.
I was just trying to put it all together, like, okay.
Yeah. So it did away with the question of Jewishness. You didn't
Right.
have to be Jewish, according to Paul. It also did away with the question of Roman citizenship. And that is going to be even more important as the Roman Empire fragments. It's you can be a barbarian, you know, you can be Irish, you can be Ethiopian, you can be whatever, and still be a Christian, even if you were not officially a Roman citizen. So that huge disparity, you know, between being a Roman citizen and not being a Roman citizen, being a subject of Rome but not a citizen of Rome, that's going to go away under the Christian model. Anybody can be a Christian. And an interesting way of thinking about this is the difference between Catholicism and Protestantism in the New World, because when the English came to America, they were fine with indentured servitude, and ultimately they were fine with slavery, right? But when the Spanish came to the New World in Florida, as far as they were concerned, the Pope had ruled that no baptized Christian, no baptized Catholic, could be the slave of another baptized Catholic. That because once you were baptized, you were equal. You know, in Christ, there is neither Jew nor Gentile, male nor female, slave nor free. So the Pope, the Catholic Pope, had said, you know, if this person is baptized as a Catholic, they can no longer be the slave of another baptized Catholic. The first underground railroad in the United States ran south. It was slaves escaping from Georgia and the Carolinas to Florida, because if they could get to Florida and be baptized Catholic, the Spanish would no longer consider them slaves. So that is a much later version of that same thing about, in Christianity, it doesn't matter whether you were born a Roman citizen or not. You're still equal. You're equal in the church, in the eyes of the church. Now, that didn't always mean you were socially equal, but at least within the cult. So. Anything else about setting up this context? Okay, well, thank you, everybody. It's good to see you as always. See you next week, and we'll look at some dates, and we'll try not to make them too dry.
Thank you so much, Kendall.